The nurse said my son had already been informed that I was being discharged, so I waited for him. I sat on the edge of the hospital bed with my small brown handbag resting on my lap. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and overcooked vegetables drifting in from the hallway. Somewhere, a machine beeped in a slow, patient rhythm. I watched the door. Each time footsteps passed, my shoulders lifted slightly, then settled again. Maddox was always punctual as a boy. If school ended at 3, he appeared at 3. If I asked him to be home before dark, he arrived while the sky was still blue, so I kept waiting. After 40 minutes, the nurse returned and asked gently, "Do you have someone coming for you, Mrs. Hale?" "Yes," I said, "my son." She smiled in the careful way nurses do when they are trying not to worry you. "Well, discharge paperwork is complete. You're free to go whenever you're ready." Ready. It is a strange word when your chest still aches from surgery and your legs feel uncertain beneath you. I called Maddox. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, sweetheart," I said after the tone. "They're sending me home today. I'm in room 214. "No rush, but I'm ready whenever you are." I hung up and folded my hands together so he would not hear the small tremor in them if he called back. He didn't. An hour later, I called a taxi. The driver was a quiet man who smelled faintly of peppermint gum. He placed my bag carefully in the trunk as if it were heavier than it looked. "Hospital stays are never fun," he said kindly as he helped me into the back seat. "No," I replied. "But it's always good to go home." At least, I believed that then. The drive felt longer than usual. October had begun brushing the trees with amber and leaves collected along the curbs like little forgotten letters. When we turned onto my street, I felt that familiar easing inside my chest, the one that comes when you see the place where your life has unfolded. Home is not just walls, it is memory. It is the echo of laughter in hallways, the faint mark on the floor where a piano once stood, the scent of cinnamon that never quite leaves the kitchen wood. I paid the driver and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, steadying myself before climbing the 3 shallow porch steps. Something looked different. It took me a second to understand what it was. The flower pots were gone. I had planted white geraniums before being admitted to the hospital. Vanessa never liked them, said they looked old-fashioned. Still, I hadn't imagined she would remove them. Perhaps they had wilted. Perhaps Maddox had cleared them away. I told myself not to read into small things. Recovery makes the mind fragile. I slid my key into the lock. It stopped halfway. I withdrew it, turned it over, and tried again. Nothing. For a moment, I wondered if my hands were simply weak. Surgery has a way of stealing strength you don't realize you've lost. So I braced my palm against the door and pushed gently while turning the key. It would not move. That was when I noticed the metal, bright, smooth, new. A quiet stillness passed through me, not yet alarm, just a thin thread of confusion. I knocked, no answer. I knocked again, a little louder. From across the street, I heard the soft creak of a window opening. Mrs. Langford, who had lived there nearly as long as I had, leaned out slightly. "Oh," she said, clearly startled. "Aurora, you're back." The way she said it made it sound unexpected. "Yes," I replied. "They released me this morning." Her lips parted as if she meant to say more, but then her gaze shifted somewhere behind me and she quickly pulled the curtain. A small unease gathered in my stomach. Before I could knock again, the door opened, but only a few inches, caught by the security chain. Vanessa stood there. She looked immaculate, cream sweater, gold earrings, hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. For a brief moment I thought she might smile. She did not. "You're here," she said, "not welcome home, just you're here." "Yes," I answered softly. "My key seems stuck." "It isn't stuck," she replied. "We changed the locks." The sentence was delivered without sharpness, without apology, simply as a fact. I waited for her to explain further. She did not. "May I come in?" I asked. Vanessa hesitated, and that hesitation told me more than words could have. "I don't think that would be best right now, Aurora. Right now." The porch felt suddenly colder. "I live here," I said, keeping my voice even. "The house is under Maddox's name," she replied gently. "We finalized that while you were hospitalized. It simplifies things. Simplifies." I looked past her shoulder and caught a glimpse of the hallway mirror, the one my husband insisted on hanging himself, though it took him 3 attempts to align it properly. 47 years of marriage reflected in that mirror. "Where is Maddox?" I asked. "At work." "He knew I was coming home today?" "Yes." She folded her hands together almost professionally. "We didn't expect it to be so soon." A quiet passed between us. Then she added in the same measured tone, "I've told the neighbors you would not be returning. That you were likely transitioning into assisted care after your recovery." The words moved through me slowly like cold water. "You told them I wasn't coming back?" "It prevented questions," she said. For the first time, I became aware of shapes behind curtains, the faint movement of someone pausing at the end of a driveway. People were watching, and they believed I no longer belonged here. "I was gone 12 days, I said. Vanessa nodded once. "Hard events at your age can be unpredictable." Maddox thought it wise to prepare. Prepare, such a tidy word for something so enormous. "I prepared that house for 50 years, I said quietly, "every corner of it." Her expression softened, but only slightly. "And you've done a beautiful job, truly. But seasons change, Aurora. Houses pass to the next generation. That is the natural order. Natural, as though I were autumn leaves making way for winter." "I would like to hear this from my son," I said. "You will," she replied. "Just not on the porch?" For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she asked almost kindly, "Do you have somewhere you can stay tonight?" The question was practical, thoughtful, even, and yet it landed with a weight that pressed against my ribs. Because in 73 years, I had never imagined needing somewhere else to go. I picked up my bag. "I suppose," I said slowly, "that is something I must now figure out." Vanessa inclined her head. "I do hope you understand this is not meant to be unkind. Only sensible." Sensible. The chain remained fastened. The door closed gently, not slammed, not angrily, just firmly, and I found myself standing on a porch that still smelled faintly of the lemon oil I used every Sunday, realizing that a life can shift quietly without raised voices or warning. As I stepped down toward the walkway, one thought settled deep within me. There are moments when the world does not end loudly. It simply rearranges itself and expects you to accept the new shape. I did not cry, not then, but for the first time since leaving the hospital. I did not know where home was. I did not argue with Vanessa. There are moments when the heart understands that forcing a door will only deepen the humiliation of finding it locked. So I picked up my bag, stepped off the porch, and walked down the 3 familiar steps as if I were visiting someone else's home, not leaving my own. The wood creaked beneath my weight in the same places it always had. Even that felt like a quiet goodbye. Halfway to the sidewalk, I heard a curtain shift, then another. When you live somewhere long enough, you learn the language of small movements, blinds tilting, shadows pausing, silhouettes pretending not to watch. They had all been told I wasn't coming back. And now I had returned like an error no one knew how to correct. "Aurora," I turned slowly. It was Mrs. Pelham, still holding her front door open with one hand, uncertainty written gently across her face. "Vanessa said you were being moved into assisted living," she said. We thought you wouldn't be returning." "I thought so too," I replied before I could stop myself. The sentence surprised us both. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Are you all right, dear?" It is a strange question. People usually ask it when the answer is clearly no, but politeness requires the ritual. "Yes," I said softly, "I'm just adjusting." She glanced toward the house. "Did something happen?" "Not suddenly," I said, which is what makes it harder to understand. A breeze moved between us, carrying the faint scent of the lemon cleaner I had used on that porch only 2 weeks earlier. I remembered polishing the railing slowly, telling Maddox on the phone that I might plant chrysanthemums when I returned from my cardiology checkup. Return. Such an ordinary expectation. "Would you like to come sit for a moment?" Mrs. Pelham asked. "You shouldn't be standing after leaving the hospital." The word hospital seemed to echo. Until that moment, I had been too occupied with the locked door to feel how tired my body truly was. "Yes," I admitted, "perhaps just for a minute." Her living room was warm, the clock ticking steadily above the mantel. It smelled faintly of cinnamon tea, normal smells. Comforting smells, the kind that remind you the world has not entirely shifted, only your place within it. She helped me lower myself onto the sofa. "Maddox didn't come with you?" she asked gently. "No." Oh, that small syllable carried more understanding than a paragraph ever could. I folded my hands together and looked down at them. The skin seemed thinner than I remembered. Age does that quietly, it changes you while you are busy living. "I should call him," I said after a moment. "Mrs. Pelham nodded and moved discreetly into the kitchen, granting me privacy without announcing it. Maddox answered on the 3rd ring. "Mom, are you home?" His voice sounded distracted but not unkind, the voice of a man in the middle of a workday. "I'm across the street," I said. "At Mrs. Pelham's?" A pause. "You saw Vanessa?" "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. "I meant to call before you arrived," he said. "I waited at the hospital," I replied quietly. "They told me you had been notified." Things were complicated here this morning." Complicated? I let the word pass without examining it too closely. "Maddox, my key no longer fits." "Yes," he said, "we had the locks changed last week." He spoke as though discussing a repaired faucet. "Why?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "Mom, when you were admitted, the doctors warned us to prepare for different outcomes. It frightened Vanessa." "I see, and it made us realize we needed to make decisions we'd been postponing, such as deciding where I belonged. The house is legally mine now," he continued carefully. "You wanted that, remember, to avoid difficulties later." "I wanted to spare you paperwork after I was gone," I said, "not to be erased before I was." Silence moved through the line, then he said something that settled heavily in my chest. "We converted your room." "Converted? For the baby?" The word softened his voice immediately. "You're going to be a grandmother, Mom." Joy flickered, brief, confused, like a candle unsure whether it should burn. "A baby," I repeated. "Yes, Vanessa is nearly 4 months along." 4 months. And I had not known. "That is wonderful news," I said, and I meant it. Love for a child does not wait for invitations, but beneath the warmth came a quieter realization. There had been time to plan a nursery, time to change locks, time to speak with neighbors. Only one conversation had been postponed, the one with me. "When were you planning to tell me?" I asked gently. "We didn't want to worry you before your procedure." "I might have enjoyed knowing," I said. He did not answer. Instead, he continued in that careful tone people use when they believe they are being reasonable. "Vanessa feels it would be better for everyone if you stayed somewhere with more support while you recover, somewhere comfortable with staff." "A residence," I said. "Yes, at least temporarily." Temporary arrangements have a way of becoming permanent when they suit those who make them. "I walked out of the hospital this morning," I said, "on my own feet." "I know, and that's remarkable, but hard events can be unpredictable at your age." At your age. There is no cruelty in the phrase, only distance. I looked toward the window. From that angle I could see the corner of my porch. My rocking chair was gone. "Did you ask for it to be moved?" I asked quietly. "Oh," Vanessa thought it looked worn. "We're refreshing a few things before the baby arrives." Refreshing, as if decades of living were simply a color scheme ready for updating. "I would have liked to choose what stayed," I said. "Mom, try not to see this as rejection. Then help me understand what it is." Another silence. Finally he said, "It's the next stage of life." "For whom?" I wondered, but I did not ask. There is a moment when a mother realizes her son is no longer seeking her understanding, only her cooperation. "Where would you like me to go tonight, Maddox?" "I assumed you might stay at a recovery center for a few weeks." I was not consulted. "We didn't want to burden you with decisions while you were ill." Burden, the word rested heavily between us. "I am still your mother," I said softly, "not a package to be redirected." His voice lowered. "No one is discarding you." I almost smiled at that. Discarding is rarely announced. It is arranged quietly under the language of practicality. "I won't argue today," I told him. "My strength is not yet fully my own." "That's wise," he said, relief slipping into his voice. Relief. We spoke a little longer about medications, follow-up appointments, small harmless things that allowed us both to pretend the larger conversation had been completed. When the call ended, I remained very still. Mrs. Pelham returned with tea and placed it carefully in my hands. "You may stay here as long as you need," she said. Her kindness nearly unraveled me, but something steady had begun forming inside my chest, something quieter than anger. "No," I said gently. "Thank you, but I think it is important that I stand somewhere on my own tonight." She nodded, understanding more than I had explained. A short while later, I called a taxi. As we pulled away, I looked once more at the house. The upstairs curtain shifted. Perhaps it was only the air vents stirring the fabric, or perhaps Vanessa was watching to ensure I truly left. I did not wave. The hotel room was small but clean. The sheets smelled faintly of starch. I placed my bag on the bed and sat beside it, listening to the unfamiliar silence. For the first time since the porch, the reality settled fully. A life can be reorganized without your permission. Not loudly, not cruelly, just efficiently. I removed the hospital bracelet and set it on the nightstand. My wrist felt strangely bare. After some time, I opened my wallet and found the photograph I had carried for years, Maddox at 6, grinning with a missing tooth, holding my hand on his first day of school. On the back, in uneven pencil, he had written, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll always come back home." I traced the letters slowly. Then I whispered into the quiet room, not with bitterness, only with a tired kind of wonder. When did home stop including me? Sleep came late that night. But before it did, one thought settled gently, firmly into place. If my return had been planned without me, then my next step would have to be chosen by me, and I would choose it carefully. Woke before the sun had fully risen. For a moment I did not know where I was. The ceiling above me was unfamiliar, too smooth, too pale, and the quiet lacked the subtle language of my home. No pipes humming awake. No sparrows gathering near the kitchen window. No soft, settling sounds of a house that had memorized your rhythms. Then I remembered. In memory, I have learned, does not rush. It returns slowly, allowing you just enough time to feel the absence before the understanding arrives. I sat up carefully. My chest still held that fragile soreness that comes after the heart has been handled by surgeons, as if it knows it has been touched too closely. The bedside clock read 6:12. At home, I would already have water heating for tea. For nearly 50 years, my mornings began the same way. Kettle, thin slice of toast, the small blue plate Thomas insisted we use only for breakfast because ritual deserves its own dishes. Routine is not trivial, it is the architecture of belonging. I dressed slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the parking lot was still damp from overnight rain. A young couple crossed toward their car, speaking quietly, their shoulders leaning toward each other without thinking. I wondered briefly if Maddox and Vanessa walked that way now, naturally aligned, their world narrowing comfortably to 2, soon to be 3, grandmother. The word still felt tender, but it no longer floated freely. It'd wait now. After washing my face, I made a decision that felt both simple and enormous. I would go back to the house. Not to argue, not to demand, only to understand. Morning light has a gentleness that afternoon does not. It softens edges, persuades you that conversations might unfold more kindly than expected. The taxi driver left me at the corner. "I can wait if you like," he offered. "That won't be necessary," I said. But as the car disappeared, I realized how alone a person can feel standing in front of a place that used to open without question. The flower pots were still gone. In their place sat 2 smooth ceramic planters, modern, gray, symmetrical. Vanessa favored symmetry. I approached the door and knocked. This time Maddox opened it. For a moment neither of us spoke. He looked tired, older somehow. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes I had not noticed before. "Mom," he said quietly, "good morning." He stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him. I noticed without meaning to that he did not invite me in. "I thought it would be easier to talk today," he said. "Easier than yesterday's porch?" A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "I'm sorry about that." Vanessa didn't know how to handle the situation. "And you?" I asked. He looked down briefly. "I wasn't here. No, I thought, but you were somewhere inside the decision." The air carried the faint scent of fresh paint. "You've been busy," I said. "We're preparing." "For the baby?" He nodded, and despite everything, a small smile touched his mouth. "You'll understand once you hold your grandchild." I believed him. Love does not shrink simply because the heart is bruised. "May I come in for a moment?" I asked. He hesitated only a fraction, but long enough for the answer to form before he spoke. "Vanessa is resting. Mornings have been difficult for her. I won't disturb her." Another pause, then he opened the door. The hallway looked brighter. The mirror Thomas hung still remained, but the small table beneath it was gone, the one where I used to drop my keys. In its place stood a narrow white console with nothing on it. No bowl for mail, no framed photographs. No evidence of the years that had lived there. Homes do not change all at once. They change piece by piece, until one day you realize the map no longer matches your memory. "Would you like tea?" Maddox asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "I would," I said. The kitchen smelled faintly of citrus cleaner. My curtains were gone, replaced by sheer panels that allowed more light but less privacy. On the counter sat a stack of parenting books. I read the titles silently, Preparing Emotionally for Parenthood, Creating a Calm Home for Your Baby. Setting Boundaries with Extended Family, the last one lingered in my thoughts. Maddox placed a mug before me. He had used my favorite one, the pale green porcelain with the tiny crack near the handle. Something inside me softened. Perhaps not everything had been replaced. "Mom," he began, sitting across from me, "I know this feels sudden." "It feels quiet," I corrected gently. "Sudden things announce themselves." He folded his hands. "We should have spoken earlier." "Yes," I said, "you should have." He accepted that without defense. For a moment, we simply sat there, mother and son, separated by something neither of us quite knew how to name. "Your room is upstairs," he said finally, "but it's different now. I assumed it would be." Vanessa worried that climbing stairs might strain your heart. And yet no one asked whether I wished to try. Concern, I have learned, can sometimes be a mask worn by control. Footsteps sounded above us. Slow, measured. Vanessa appeared at the top of the stairs, one hand resting lightly on the railing. She wore a soft robe, her hair loosely gathered. Without her careful composure from yesterday, she looked younger, almost uncertain. "Aurora," she said, "good morning." She descended halfway before stopping, as though unsure how close was appropriate. "I hope you slept well," she offered. "I slept," I replied. A quiet stretched between us. Then, after a moment, she said something that settled deeply. "We truly believed the hospital would recommend transitional care." "Believed," I repeated. "Yes, at your age, independence can change quickly." There it was again, that gentle language that rearranges a person's life while sounding almost protective. "I am still here," I said. "Yes," she answered, "and we are grateful but not accommodating." My gaze drifted toward the staircase. "May I see the nursery?" I asked. Maddox looked uncertain, but Vanessa nodded. "Of course." The room that had once held my quilt, my books, Thomas's old reading chair, now smelled faintly of fresh paint and new wood. Sunlight spilled across a white crib. A small mobile turned slowly overhead, though no music played. It was beautiful, carefully planned, full of anticipation, and entirely absent of me. "I kept your quilt," Vanessa said quietly. "It didn't match the palette, but I couldn't bring myself to discard it." "Discard," the word echoed softly. "Thank you," I said. I walked to the window. The maple tree's branches brushed lightly against the glass, the same sound that used to lull me to sleep during storms. "Where are my things?" I asked. "In the garage," Maddox replied, "packed safely." Safely, as though memory were fragile cargo, I turned back to them. "When did you decide I would not return?" They exchanged a glance, and in that glance I saw it clearly for the first time. This had not been a single decision. It had been a series of quiet agreements formed while I was absent. "We thought it would be less disruptive for the baby," Vanessa said at last. "Disruptive?" I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak just yet. Because beneath the calm, beneath the measured breathing, a deeper awareness was beginning to rise, not anger, not even grief. But a question, steady and unmistakable. What else had been decided? While I lay in that hospital bed believing my life was simply paused, I rested my hand lightly on the crib rail. The wood was smooth, new, waiting, and in that stillness I understood something with quiet certainty. Yesterday had been the shock. Today was the first clue. Something about all this was too prepared, too resolved, too easily explained, and I intended very gently to uncover exactly what it was. I did not stay long in the nursery. There are rooms where joy and displacement can exist at the same time, but the heart can only hold that tension for so long before it asks to step away. "This is lovely," I said quietly, letting my fingers leave the crib rail. Vanessa's shoulders relaxed slightly, as though my approval mattered more than she had expected. "We wanted a calm space," she said, "somewhere the baby could feel settled." Settled, the word lingered with me as we walked back downstairs. For years, that house had been the place where Maddox came to feel settled. After scraped knees, broken friendships, the long confusion of adolescence, and later, the hollow silence after his father died. I wondered when my presence had stopped representing comfort and begun representing disruption. Back in the kitchen, Maddox poured more hot water into my mug without asking. He had learned that habit from Thomas' small care offered quietly. "Mom," he said, sitting again, "have you thought about the recovery residence I mentioned? We could visit this afternoon." "I'm not ready to decide today," I replied. Vanessa folded her hands atop the counter. "It would only be until you regained full strength." "I walked here," I said gently. "It's not only about walking," she answered. "It's about emergencies, stability, predictability. Life rarely grants it, yet people often reorganize others in its name." My gaze drifted toward the back door. Through the glass, I could see the garden, or what used to be my garden. The hydrangeas were gone. In their place stood a neat rectangle of turned soil bordered by small wooden stakes. What happened to the bushes? I asked. Oh, Vanessa said lightly, we're planning a play area. Grass is softer than roots. I nodded once. No one had asked which plants survived winter best. No one had asked which ones Thomas planted the spring before he passed. Memories are not always visible to those who did not live them. May I step outside? I asked. Of course, Maddox said. The air held that cool clarity that arrives after rain. The earth smelled newly opened, unfamiliar. I walked slowly toward the far corner where Thomas once built a narrow bench. It was gone now, replaced by nothing, just space. As I stood there, I became aware of a quiet movement behind me. Maddox joined me, slipping his hands into his pockets the way he used to as a teenager when searching for the right words. You're very quiet, he said. I'm listening, I replied. To what? To what has changed and what hasn't? He followed my gaze across the yard. We didn't mean to upset you. I believe you, I said, and I did. Cruelty requires intention. This felt more like something else, something calmer and in many ways more unsettling. Assumption. Maddox, I said after a moment, when your father and I transferred the deed, do you remember what we discussed afterward? He frowned slightly, thinking, you said it was just paperwork. I said it was trust. The word rested between us. He looked down at the damp grass. Vanessa thought it would be responsible to update things once the baby was coming. Update, I repeated softly. He shifted his weight. There are also financial considerations now. There it was, small, almost hidden beneath practical language. What considerations? I asked. He hesitated. The house has appreciated significantly. Refinancing allowed us to prepare for parental leave, future schooling, security. Security again, and my belongings in the garage, were they part of that preparation? They're safe, he said quickly. Safe is not the same as respected. A breeze passed through the yard, stirring the loose soil. Did you believe, I asked gently, that I would not notice these changes? He met my eyes then, and for a brief moment I saw the boy he had been, uncertain after a mistake. We thought you would understand. Understanding is often requested after decisions are complete. Before I could respond, Vanessa stepped onto the patio. There's something else we should mention, she said. Her voice was calm but more deliberate than before. Maddox glanced at her, then back at me. We listed the house, he said. The world did not spin, it simply grew very still. Listed, I repeated. It hasn't sold, he added quickly. We're only exploring options. For what purpose? A larger home, one level, better schools nearby, space for the baby, and possibly another someday. I absorbed this quietly. And when were you planning to tell me that the house your father built, the one where every birthday candle was blown out, was being shown to strangers? Vanessa spoke this time. We assumed you would be transitioning into assisted living before any move. Assumed, such a quiet architect of other people's lives. I felt something inside me settle then, not break, not shatter, settle, like snow finally reaching the ground after a long descent. Have there been viewings already? I asked. 2, Maddox admitted, while I was hospitalized. Yes. A sparrow landed briefly on one of the wooden stakes, then lifted again. I watched it disappear into the pale sky. Do you remember, I said slowly, learning to ride your bicycle along this fence? A faint smile touched his face despite the tension. You ran beside me the entire time, until you told me to let go, I said. He nodded. You were ready, he murmured. Yes, I agreed, but I did let go. We stood in silence for a moment. Then I asked the question that had been forming since the nursery. Maddox, if I had not returned from the hospital, how long would it have taken before everything I touched here was gone? His expression faltered. Mom, it is not an accusation, I said gently, only a question. Vanessa answered instead. We believed preparing early would spare everyone difficult decisions during grief. Grief, planned in advance, organized into boxes in the garage. I drew a slow breath, feeling the cool air steady me. When did I become a future event? I asked quietly, instead of a present person. Neither spoke, and in their silence the truth became clearer than any explanation could have made it. They had not meant to erase me. They had simply begun building a life where my presence was no longer central. It is a subtle difference, but a profound one. I will not stand in the way of your growing family, I said at last. Relief flickered across Vanessa's face before she could hide it. But, I continued softly, I will stand for my own life. Maddox's brow tightened. What does that mean? It means, I said, meeting his eyes, that before any further decisions are made about this house, about my belongings, about where I belong, we will speak clearly. With everyone present, no assumptions. Vanessa straightened slightly. Of course. Yet something in her tone suggested she had believed the decisions were already finished. As we walked back toward the house, I felt the fragile soreness in my chest again, but beneath it now lay something steadier. Not resistance, clarity. Yesterday I had been shocked. Today I understood. And understanding has a quiet way of gathering strength. At the doorway I paused and rested my hand briefly against the frame, the same frame where we once penciled Maddox's height each birthday. The marks had been painted over. I had not noticed that earlier. Perhaps it was done recently. Or perhaps I had simply trusted too completely to see what was already disappearing. One thought moved through me with calm certainty: if my life was being packed into boxes, then it was time I opened them myself. Because something about all this preparation felt less like concern and more like a story I had not yet been told, and I intended to hear it. I asked to see the garage. Vanessa offered to bring a few boxes inside instead, but I shook my head gently. No, I said, I would prefer to go to them. Some things should not be handed back to you selectively. You should stand where they were placed and see for yourself how your life has been arranged. Maddox opened the side door and the familiar scent of sawdust and old cardboard met me almost immediately. Thomas had loved that garage. Even after retirement, he found reasons to repair things that were not broken. The space looked larger now, not because it had grown, but because it had been cleared. Along the far wall stood a careful row of labeled boxes. Linens, BOOKS, kitchen, personal. I walked toward them slowly, my hand trailing along the cool surface of the car that had replaced Thomas's old workbench. Vanessa organized everything, Maddox said almost proudly, so nothing would get lost. Lost is an interesting word. Objects are rarely lost when someone knows exactly where they have put them. I rested my palm on the nearest box. May I asked. Of course, Vanessa replied. Inside were my tablecloths folded with precision I recognized as hers, not mine. The pale embroidered one my mother had given me sat on top. I remembered ironing it the night before Maddox's wedding. A small memory, but it pressed gently against my ribs. In the next box lay photographs, not in albums, stacked. Careful but detached from the stories that once held them together. I lifted one. Thomas stood in the garden, dirt on his cheek, grinning because he refused to believe roses required less sun than he had given them. He was proud of that summer, I said quietly. Maddox stepped closer. I remember, for a moment we shared the same memory and the distance between us narrowed slightly, then I noticed something missing. My cedar chest, I said. Maddox frowned. The one at the foot of my bed. Vanessa answered. We donated it. The word did not hurt immediately. Sometimes the heart pauses just long enough for meaning to arrive fully. Donated, I repeated. It was quite worn, she explained gently, and we needed space. I kept the contents, of course. Inside that chest were letters Thomas wrote during his business trips. Birthday cards Maddox made with crooked crayons, the tiny knitted booties I had saved from when he was an infant. You opened it? I asked. We had to check for anything important. Important. I closed the box in front of me and rested both hands on the lid. Please tell me, I said calmly, where it was donated. Vanessa hesitated. To St. Bartholomew's charity shop. A strange stillness filled the garage. That chest had held the quiet archive of my marriage, not expensive, not fashionable, but sacred in the way ordinary objects become when they witness a lifetime. I wish you had asked me first, I said. We didn't think, she began. No, I said gently, you didn't. Maddox shifted beside me. Mom, we were trying to make the house functional. Functional. It is remarkable how often that word is used when sentiment is inconvenient. I drew a slow breath, steadying the faint tremor in my chest. Has anything else been given away? Vanessa exchanged a quick glance with Maddox. Just a few pieces, she admitted. Things we assumed you wouldn't need. I looked at the neat row of boxes again, my life reduced to categories. What about the piano bench? I asked suddenly. Maddox blinked. You noticed it was gone. I noticed the space where it should be. We sold it with the piano last month. The piano? For a moment, the garage seemed to tilt slightly. Thomas bought that piano the year Maddox turned 8 because our son showed interest after tapping out melodies on the dining table. He practiced every afternoon for nearly 5 years. Not brilliantly, but faithfully. You sold it, I said softly. It hadn't been played in years, Vanessa replied, and the buyer was thrilled to have it restored. Restored as though its silence meant it no longer mattered. I thought of the lullabies I used to play when Maddox couldn't sleep after thunderstorms. Memory rose quietly, then settled again. There is a particular kind of grief reserved for objects that held your happiest hours. But I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. Instead, I asked the question that had begun forming with painful clarity. Maddox, when you made these decisions, did it occur to you that I might still be alive to remember them? His face tightened. Mom, please don't say it like that. Like what? Like we erased you? I held his gaze. Didn't you? The words hung between us, not sharp, not shouted, simply present. Vanessa spoke carefully. We believed it would be easier for you not to manage these things during recovery. Recovery implies returning, I said. No one answered. A car passed on the street. Somewhere nearby, a lawn mower started, its steady hum strangely grounding, ordinary life continuing while something quiet but enormous shifted inside me. After a moment, I moved to the final box. Personal. Inside lay my jewelry case, my address book, Thomas's watch, and a folder I did not recognize. I opened it. Bank documents, property papers, refinancing agreements. My eyes paused on a number, higher than I expected. You borrowed against the house, I said. Maddox nodded slowly. It made sense financially. Lower rates, future security, and if the house sells, we'll use the equity toward the next one. Next, always forward, rarely backward. I closed the folder gently and returned it to the box. Something inside me had shifted now, not cracked, not shattered, aligned. Like a lens turning until the image finally sharpens. Maddox, I said quietly, while I was in that hospital bed, how certain were you that I would not come home? His mouth opened, then closed. We didn't know, he said at last. Vanessa added softly, we prepared for the possibility. I studied their faces. They did not look cruel, they looked efficient, practical, certain they were doing what responsible adults do when life advances. And suddenly I understood something with perfect calm. They had not acted out of malice. They had acted out of assumption that my chapter was naturally nearing its end. I rested my hand lightly atop the box labeled personal. I will be taking these, I said. Of course, Maddox replied quickly. And the rest, Vanessa asked. I will decide, I said. The distinction seemed to surprise her. For the first time since entering the garage, Maddox's voice softened. Mom, where will you go? It was an honest question, not strategic, not rehearsed, and because of that I answered honestly. I don't know yet, I said. But it will be somewhere chosen, not assigned. We stood there in the quiet, surrounded by cardboard and reorganized history. Then I added, gently but unmistakably. Before this house is shown again, before another piece of my life is donated, we will speak with the lawyer who handled that deed. Maddox looked startled. The lawyer? Yes. Vanessa straightened slightly. Is that necessary? I believe clarity is always necessary, I replied. No anger colored my voice, only steadiness, because beneath the sorrow, beneath the displacement, something stronger had begun to rise, not revenge, not even resistance. Self-respect. And self-respect, once awakened, does not easily return to sleep. As I closed the garage door behind me, one quiet thought settled fully into place. They had prepared for my absence. What they had not prepared for was my return. I did not take the boxes that day. Not yet. Some decisions deserve a rested mind, and mine was still learning how to carry what it had seen. Instead, I asked Maddox to drive me back to the hotel. The ride was quiet. Not tense, just careful, like two people walking across a frozen pond, both aware the surface had changed but unsure where it might still hold. At a red light, he finally spoke. Mom, are you angry with us? I considered the question. Anger is loud, it demands immediate release. What I felt was quieter than that. No, I said, but I am awake now in a way I wasn't before. He nodded slowly, though I wasn't certain he understood. Before I stepped out of the car, I rested my hand briefly on his sleeve, a gesture I had used since he was small, when words felt unnecessary. I would like the name of the lawyer, I said gently. He hesitated. Are you thinking of contesting something? I am thinking of understanding something. That seemed to ease him, though only slightly. He wrote the name on the back of a receipt. Harold Benton. I recognized it immediately. Harold had handled Thomas's estate when my husband passed. A patient man, methodical, never rushed. Tell Vanessa I wish her well, I added before closing the door, and that I am glad the baby is healthy. Maddox's expression softened with relief. I will. The hotel room felt smaller that afternoon, not because it had changed, but because I had. There is a moment after the first wave of shock recedes when the mind begins quietly assembling the sequence of events. Not emotionally, logically. I sat at the small desk and began writing dates on a sheet of paper. The hospital admission, the deed finalization, the nursery preparation, the donations. The listing, one after another, they formed a timeline that no longer felt accidental. By the time the light outside had begun to fade, I dialed Harold Benton's office. His assistant recognized my name at once. Mrs. Hale, it's been some time, Mr. Benton will be glad to hear from you. He returned the call himself less than an hour later. Aurora, he said warmly, how are you feeling? Stronger every day, I replied, though I find myself in need of clarity. Of course. I understand the house transfer was finalized recently. Yes, he said. Your son requested the completion once the medical situation appeared serious. You had already signed the primary documents months ago. I remember signing them, I said. What I do not remember is discussing my right to remain in the home. A small pause, then papers rustled faintly on his end. You retained lifetime occupancy, he said. The words settled gently but firmly. I beg your pardon. The agreement specifies that while ownership passes to Maddox, you maintain the legal right to reside in the property for the duration of your life unless you voluntarily relinquish it. For a moment, I simply listened to the quiet hum of the phone line. They changed the locks, I said. Another pause, this one heavier. Were you provided new keys? No, his voice grew more deliberate. Aurora, preventing a lifetime occupant from accessing the property raises serious legal concerns. I closed my eyes, not from triumph, from confirmation. I see, I said softly. Would you like me to speak with Maddox? He asked. Not yet, I replied. I would prefer to do that myself. After we ended the call, I remained seated for a long time, my hand still resting lightly on the receiver. There is a particular calm that arrives when uncertainty is replaced by truth, not happiness, not vindication, just steadiness. For the first time since the porch, I felt the ground beneath me again. The next morning, I returned to the house. This time, I did not knock. I rang the bell and waited. Vanessa opened the door. Surprise flickered across her face, followed quickly by composure. Aurora, good morning. Maddox appeared behind her. Is everything all right? Yes, I said. May we sit together for a moment? Something in my tone must have told them this was not a casual visit, because they led me to the dining table without question. The chair felt familiar beneath me. For a second, I nearly expected Thomas to walk in with the newspaper folded beneath his arm. I spoke with Harold Benton yesterday, I began. Maddox straightened slightly. Oh, he reminded me of a detail I had forgotten. Vanessa's fingers stilled atop the table. My lifetime occupancy, I said gently. Silence followed, not hostile, but unmistakably stunned. You have the right to live here as long as you wish, I continued. The lock should never have been changed without providing me access. Maddox looked at Vanessa, then back at me. We thought, yes, I said softly, you thought. Vanessa spoke carefully. We believed the transfer meant the house was fully ours to manage. It is yours to own, I replied, not to withhold. The distinction settled heavily in the room. For a moment, no one moved. Then Maddox leaned forward, his voice lower than before. Mom, why didn't you remind us? The question carried genuine confusion, and it revealed more than he intended, because it meant they had never looked closely at the agreement after it served their immediate purpose. I trusted that I would never need to, I said. Vanessa's composure wavered. This was never meant to hurt you. I know, I answered, and I did know. Harm is not always born from cruelty. Sometimes it grows quietly from convenience. Maddox rubbed his forehead. We can give you a key today. I studied his face, the boy I had raised, the man sitting before me. I will accept a key, I said, but more importantly, I will be returning. Both of them froze. Returning, Vanessa repeated, yes. The word felt neither dramatic nor defiant, only rightful. We already prepared the nursery, she said softly, and it is beautiful, I replied, but the house holds more than one life. Maddox exhaled slowly. This will require adjustments. Yes, I agreed, for all of us. A long silence passed, then very gently I added, I am not asking to reclaim the past, only to remain part of the present. Something in Maddox's expression shifted then, not resistance, not quite regret, recognition. I should have handled this differently, he said. Vanessa lowered her gaze. We both should have. I reached across the table and rested my hand lightly over hers. Her skin felt cool. You are preparing to become a mother, I said. One day you will understand that a parent's presence is not furniture to be rearranged. Her eyes filled unexpectedly. I never knew my grandparents, she whispered. They were gone before I could remember them. I thought independence was kinder than obligation. Ah, there it was, not malice, history, fear disguised as practicality. I do not wish to be an obligation, I said, only a belonging. The room grew very quiet. Outside, a breeze stirred the branches against the window. At last, Maddox stood. I'll get your key, he said. When he placed it in my palm, the metal felt heavier than it should have, not because of its weight, because of what it restored. I will come back in 2 days, I told them, after I collect my things properly. Vanessa nodded. We'll make space. As I stepped toward the door, Maddox spoke again. Mom, yes, I'm glad you came home from the hospital. I met his eyes. So am I said. But as I walked down the porch steps once more, another truth settled quietly beside that one. Returning was only the beginning. Because now that I was awake, there were still things that needed to be faced, not loudly, not harshly, but openly. And sometimes the deepest reckonings do not happen in private at all. They unfold where everyone can finally see them. I returned 3 days later with 2 suitcases and a steadier heart. The morning was cool, washed in that pale gold light that belongs only to early autumn. Leaves gathered quietly along the curb, and for the first time since the hospital, I did not feel like a visitor approaching the house. I felt like someone arriving. Maddox opened the door before I knocked. He must have been watching from the window. Let me take those, he said, reaching for my suitcase. Thank you. The hallway still smelled faintly of fresh paint, but something else lingered now too, cinnamon. Vanessa stood in the kitchen stirring a pot on the stove. I made oatmeal, she said almost shyly. I wasn't sure what you'd feel like eating. It was such a small gesture that my chest tightened unexpectedly. Thank you, I replied. Small gestures matter. They are often the first language of repair. My things, I asked gently. We moved them back upstairs, Maddox said. Not everything yet, but enough so you'd feel settled. Settled? The word sounded different now, less like a negotiation, more like an offering. When I entered the bedroom, my bedroom, I paused at the threshold. The walls were the same soft cream. The window faced the maple tree exactly as before, but the room held fewer things, simpler things. My quilt lay folded neatly at the foot of the bed. Thomas's reading chair had returned to its corner. And on the nightstand sat the small porcelain lamp shaped like a swan, a gift from Maddox when he was 12 and convinced it looked elegant. I ran my hand lightly across the quilt. Fabric remembers in ways people sometimes forget. I hope it's all right, Vanessa said from the doorway. We tried to make it comfortable without undoing the nursery. It is more than all right, I said, and I meant it. Because comfort, I was learning, does not always require everything to be as it once was. Only that you are allowed to remain. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. Vanessa glanced at me. I should have mentioned your friend Alina called yesterday. I hope you don't mind. I told her you were home. Mind? For a moment, I nearly laughed. Alina stepped inside carrying a bouquet far too large for a casual visit. The moment she saw me, her eyes filled. Aurora, hail, she whispered, setting the flowers aside so she could hold both my hands. When Vanessa told the bridge group you had been moved permanently, I felt something wasn't right. Neither did I said softly. She studied my face. You look stronger than I expected. I am stronger than I was. We sat together while Vanessa brought tea. For a while we spoke of ordinary things, the church roof needing repair, Mrs. Dunlop's noisy parrot, the early frost predicted next week. Ordinary conversation is a quiet mercy after upheaval. But Alina was never one to circle truth for long. They said the house might be sold, she said carefully. It was considered, I replied. She turned toward Maddox and Vanessa. Forgive an old friend's boldness, but Aurora built her life here. Maddox met her gaze calmly. We understand that now. Vanessa nodded. We made decisions too quickly. Alina looked back at me searching. And you? I am still deciding what comes next, I said. That evening, more neighbors appeared than I expected. Word travels gently but efficiently on streets like ours. Mrs. Pelham brought a pie. The young couple from 2 doors down sent flowers. Even Mr. Langford, who rarely spoke more than necessary, stopped by with a quiet, "Good to see you back where you belong." Belong, the word moved through the house like warm light. I noticed too the way Maddox seemed to hear it each time, not defensively, reflectively. As the last visitor left, Vanessa leaned against the counter and exhaled. "I didn't realize how many people cared for you," she admitted. I smiled faintly. "When you live somewhere long enough, your roots grow beyond your own garden." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised me. "I think I was afraid of those roots." I looked at her. "Afraid? My parents moved constantly," she explained. "Nothing stayed, no neighbors remembered your name. When I imagined raising a child, I wanted control, predictability. I thought fewer attachments meant fewer complications. And now," she glanced toward the living room where Maddox was gathering empty cups. "Now I see that belonging might actually be what makes a place safe." Later, after the dishes were washed and the house grew still, Maddox knocked softly on my open bedroom door. "Do you have a minute?" "Always." He sat at the edge of the chair, hands loosely clasped. "I've been thinking about something Harold said when I called him this morning." "You called him?" "Yes, after you left the other day." He drew a slow breath. "He told me lifetime occupancy isn't only legal, it's relational. It assumes family will act in good faith." "Good faith? I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly. "Not because you forced us to reconsider, but because I didn't reconsider on my own. There are apologies that attempt to end discomfort, and there are apologies that open understanding." His felt like the second. "I accept that," I said gently. He nodded, then added, "We've withdrawn the listing." The words settled softly. "No more showings, no more plans to move, at least not without a conversation that includes you." Emotion rose unexpectedly, not sharp but warm enough to sting my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. He looked around the room. "I think somewhere along the way I started seeing this house as an asset instead of a history." "It can be both," I said. "Yes," he replied, "but history deserves the louder voice." When he left, I sat quietly for a long time. Through the window, the maple leaves trembled under the porch light, and I realized something important. Justice does not always arrive as punishment. Sometimes it arrives as recognition. In the days that followed, the house found a new rhythm. Vanessa began asking my opinion about paint colors, about where the baby's rocking chair should go, even about which pediatrician neighbors trusted most. Not because she had to, but because something inside her had shifted from management to inclusion. One afternoon, she placed my old recipe box on the counter. "I thought," she said almost hesitantly, "that someday you might teach me which meals Maddox loved as a child." I smiled. "He loved everything with cinnamon." She laughed softly. "Good, I've been practicing." Even the garden began to feel less like a replacement and more like a continuation. Maddox rebuilt the bench Thomas once made. Not identical, but sturdy, respectful. As we sat there together one evening, he said quietly, "I think I forgot that preparing for the future doesn't require erasing the past." The air smelled faintly of cut grass, and for the first time since the hospital, my chest felt completely, peacefully my own. Yet beneath that peace, another understanding formed, one gentle but unmistakable. Families do not remain whole by avoiding hard moments. They remain whole by facing them and choosing one another anyway. Winter announced itself early that year. Not with a storm, but with a quiet, steady cold that settled into the mornings and persuaded the maple tree to let go of its last leaves. By then, the house had learned a new balance. Not the old one, that would have been impossible, but something gentler, more spacious. A belonging that made room instead of measuring it. Vanessa's pregnancy rounded softly into its final months, and with it came a different kind of preparation. Not the efficient clearing that had once pushed my life into boxes, but a shared readiness. One afternoon, she knocked lightly on my door. "Aurora, would you come upstairs? The baby's room doesn't feel finished." When I entered the nursery, I noticed it immediately. My quilt, the one she had saved, was draped over the rocking chair. "I thought the room needed something with history," she said quietly. "Something that existed before us." Emotion rose in my throat, warm and unexpected. "It's perfect," I whispered. She rested a hand on the curve of her stomach. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about belonging not being furniture to rearrange." I smiled faintly. Motherhood rearranges you enough on its own. She laughed softly, then grew thoughtful again. I hope, she said, that our child grows up knowing this house holds more than just us. He will, I said. Or she corrected gently. We both smiled. The baby arrived on a gray morning in late January. Maddox called just before dawn, his voice trembling in a way I had not heard since he was small. It's time, he said. Hospitals feel different when you enter them waiting for a beginning instead of fearing an ending. Hours passed quietly. Then at last, a nurse appeared with that unmistakable smile. A healthy little girl. When Maddox placed her in my arms, the world narrowed beautifully to the weight of her. So small, so certain. Her fingers curled instinctively around mine, and in that instant, something inside me healed in a place I had not realized was still wounded. Hello, Clara, I whispered. They had named her Clara Elise after Vanessa's mother, and Clara, Maddox told me, because the name meant bright. She should grow up surrounded by light, he said. I thought of the nursery window, the maple tree, the house that had nearly slipped from my life. She will, I replied. Bringing the baby home changed everything again, but this time not through quiet removal, through addition. The house filled with new sounds. Soft cries at midnight, the rhythmic creak of the rocking chair, Vanessa humming tunelessly when she thought no one was listening. And sometimes, when exhaustion blurred the edges of their confidence, they handed Clara to me with grateful eyes. Just for a moment, Vanessa would say, moments became routines, morning walks, afternoon naps. Maddox rediscovered the piano through a small electric keyboard he bought one Saturday. I want her to grow up with music, he explained. The melodies were clumsy at first, but faithful. Just like when he was 8. One evening, as snow tapped gently against the windows, we sat together in the living room, Clara asleep against my shoulder. I need to tell you something, Vanessa said quietly. I looked up. I used to think strength meant managing everything alone, she continued. But watching you, I see that strength can also mean staying, even after being hurt. I considered her words. Staying is easier, I said, when those around you are willing to make space. Maddox leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. I've learned something too, he said. Ownership isn't the same as stewardship. This house, it isn't just ours because our names are on paper. It's ours because of what has been lived inside it. Outside, the wind softened. Inside, Clara sighed in her sleep, and I realized that what we had rebuilt together was not merely an arrangement, it was trust. Spring returned slowly. Crocuses appeared first, stubborn and bright against the lingering chill. One morning, Maddox handed me a small envelope. Inside was a document. What is this? I asked. A revision, he said. Harold helped us draw it up. I adjusted my glasses and read carefully. The house, it stated, would remain a shared family residence for as long as I wished to live there. Any future decisions regarding its sale would require my consent. I looked up, unable to speak for a moment. You shouldn't ever have to wonder again where you belong, he said. Emotion pressed gently behind my ribs. Thank you, I managed. Vanessa touched my arm. We didn't just want to say we learned, she said. We wanted to live it. That afternoon, I returned to the garden. Together, Vanessa and I planted new hydrangeas along the fence, not replacements, continuations. As we worked, she paused and asked almost shyly. Will you teach Clara the names of the flowers when she's older? I would be honored, I said. The soil was cool between my fingers. And as I pressed the roots into place, I felt something settle fully inside me, a peace earned not by avoiding conflict, but by walking through it with dignity intact. Now, when I sit on the rebuilt bench and watch Clara toddle toward the maple tree, I sometimes think back to that afternoon on the porch, to the locked door, to the quiet certainty that my life had been rearranged without me. If I have learned anything, it is this. Families are not preserved by perfection. They are preserved by correction, by the courage to admit when we have mistaken efficiency for care or control for protection. Most of all, they are preserved by remembering that love does not make room by pushing someone out. It expands, always. So if you are listening to my story today, I want to leave you with a gentle question, the kind that lingers long after the telling. Have you ever assumed someone would understand without first inviting them into the conversation? If this story touched something in your heart, share it with someone you love. And tell me, truly, what would you have done if you came home one day and found the locks changed?